Hello and welcome to Thursday Thoughts, in which I present my September mid-month wrap-up. I finished Old Goriot by Honore de Balzac. It had a slow start due to Balzac's decision to describe in minute detail aspects of the boarding house in which Old Goriot lives. Balzac realized that he was being too descriptive and that this was boring for the reader, because on page 6 he wrote, "It would be impossible to give an idea of the old, rotten, shaky, cranky, worm-eaten, halt, maimed, one-eyed, rickety and ramshackle condition of the furniture without an exhaustive description which would delay the progress of the story to an extent that impatient people would not pardon." However, having got past that shaky start, the interest picks up and I began to really enjoy the story of how Eugene de Rastignac was making his way in society and began developing a relationship with one of Old Goriot's married daughters. Unfortunately, in spite of these enjoyable episodes, the story took a decidedly downward turn towards the end. The last 50 or so pages developed into a melodrama as Old Goriot speaks to his daughters in extravagant and frankly ridiculous superlatives. So all in all, I enjoyed about 3/4 of this novel, but the beginning and the ending were not a success. I read the prologue to the Canterbury Tales by Geoffrey Chaucer, in which he describes the pilgrims one by one. I found this to be pretty dull and unenjoyable, but it had to be got through as it lays the foundation of the tales to follow. Then I read The Knight's Tale. This was much more enjoyable, as I got into the narrative of two knights who were not only in prison but were also in love with the same woman, whom they were able to see regularly. One managed to escape from prison and one still remained in prison, and the narrator asked, "You lovers, now I ask you this question. Who was the worse, Arcita or Palamon? The one may see his lady day by day, but yet in prison must he dwell for aye. The other, where he wishes, he may go, but never see his lady more. Ah, no. Now answer as you wish, all you that can. What would you choose? Let me know in the comments below." And I read The Sun in Splendour by Plaidy, the 14th and final book in her Plantagenet series, which I began in January 2018. This was the story of Henry IV and Elizabeth Woodville, the two princes in the Tower, the rise of Richard III, and the end of 300 years of Plantagenet rule, when Henry Tudor defeated Richard III at Bosworth Field and then married Elizabeth of York, thus uniting the houses of Lancaster and York, ending the War of the Roses and beginning the Tudor period. I have purposely given a brief synopsis of this story because of what I plan to do in the future affecting this novel, which will be revealed on Sunday the 30th of September in a channel update. Suffice it to say that Plaidy was at her brilliant best, and I thoroughly enjoyed this novel. I also finished The Four Swans by Winston. It is set in Cornwall in 1795 to 1797 and is the 6th volume in the Poldark series of 12 novels. The Four Swans are the 4 main female protagonists of the novel. In a highly accomplished work, Winston dissects the highs and lows in the marriages of the 4 women. de Melzer has been married to Ross Poldark for several years, and they have 2 children. She has now become established and even accepted in polite society. A rift had appeared in their marriage some years earlier due to Poldark's infidelity with his ex-sweetheart Elizabeth just prior to her marriage to his rival George Warlegan. Now de Melzer has become infatuated with a young lieutenant who has fallen madly in love with her and writes her love poetry, which she conceals from Ross. George Warlegan has become insanely jealous of his wife Elizabeth due to his suspicion that he is not the father of their son, who had been born 1 month premature. Elizabeth herself struggles with the issue because she is unsure if her husband or Ross is the father of her child. Morwenna, Elizabeth's cousin, has been forced to marry a man she does not love, the Reverend Osborne Whitworth, who is a selfish, inconsiderate beast. When Morwenna gives birth to a son and is desperately ill afterwards, he allows her no time to properly recover before forcing himself upon her until Dr. Ennis orders him to desist. He then takes up with Morwenna's 15-year-old sister, who lives with them. Caroline became Dr. Ennis's wife after Ross rescued him from a French prison where his health suffered. Dr. Ennis insists on working to the extent that he neglects Caroline. She is naturally resentful, and thus conflict ensues. All the personal issues and conflicts are played out and skillfully interwoven against the backdrop of war with France and the continuing rivalry between Poldark and Warlegan. This is a superb and highly accomplished novel by a skillful writer writing at the full height of his powers. Winston Graham drives the narrative forward as he displays the complex, interrelated lives of these characters with admirable perception of human relationships as they are acted upon by events, political, personal, and international. I thought it a thoroughly engaging novel at every level. And now, here's a thirsty thought.